The date is March 13th of 2020. This day would infamously be remembered as the day the world began shutting down by many people in America. COVID-19 had been spreading throughout the country for the past few months, but now cases were rising rapidly at a concerning rate. Throughout the course of the day, thousands of schools, businesses, restaurants, and even certain stores began closing for the foreseeable future. Quarantine regulations began and everyone was stuck at home. With tensions being high and life continuing to get more stressful, people started turning to hobbies and the internet to cure boredom. Now, I could go on and on about how quarantine affected the internet during this period of time, but I'm actually going to save that topic for another video I'm thinking about. What I do want to talk about right now is how much video games spiked in popularity during quarantine. It helped people have an outlet to create things, immerse themselves in stories, or relax and just escape to another reality, even if it was only for a little while. Personally, I started gaming even more than I used to. Video games became a part of my routine while being stuck at home. I had many comfort games during this time I would play often, but there's one title that stands out to me that I don't think I would have made it through 2020 without, and that game is Animal Crossing: New Horizons. Animal Crossing for the Switch was originally announced during a Nintendo Direct in September of 2018. The game had no known date of release and no launch title yet, but nonetheless, fans were incredibly excited to hear that one of Nintendo's most beloved franchises would be coming soon to Nintendo Switch. It wasn't until E3 of 2019 that, via a Nintendo Direct, fans would finally get answers as to what this new Animal Crossing title would be called and its expected date of release, which was originally 2019, but thanks to COVID and a few other circumstances, Nintendo decided to move that date to March 20th of 2020. So, March 20th eventually rolls around, and Nintendo launches Animal Crossing: New Horizons to the public. This happens only 1 week after regulations for quarantine start in America. I don't think any developer at Nintendo was prepared for how strange and interesting the conditions this game would release in. But despite all of these complications going on at the time, New Horizons was still available to be picked up at any local store, if you could brave going in there, or by downloading it through the eShop. I don't think words can describe just how hyped this game was at its launch. It seemed that everywhere I turned, someone on the internet was talking about New Horizons and starting their island. So many people started streaming it on Twitch, YouTube, everywhere. It just seemed that New Horizons was seeping into every online social platform it could find. Heck, I remember people online and even some of my friends talking about how they were just gonna buy a Nintendo Switch just for the sake of playing New Horizons. That's how anticipated this game was. It was unlike anything else, and since COVID kind of played a role of people's interest in the game, we saw copies of this game selling like wildfire. Animal Crossing: New Horizons made its way to become the second most best-selling game on Nintendo Switch, which is insane, especially considering that it released in a time such as quarantine. New Horizons seemingly was on top of the world at this point in time. It had so many copies being sold, everyone online was talking about it, and so many people were encouraging others to go out and purchase the game. This new release became its own phenomenon. It's 4 years later, and what happened? Nobody is talking about this game. Nobody I know even really plays it anymore. Its community and fan base as a whole just kinda fell off. So why is this? Why is New Horizons so dead? Well, we're going to talk about that today because I have a few opinions of my own. So strap in, everyone. Grab your buckets of popcorn as we talk about what happened to New Horizons and what led to its downfall. To start off, I want to preface this by saying that we'll be talking about both pros and cons to New Horizons, because while I do consider New Horizons to be a deeply flawed entry to the Animal Crossing franchise, I don't think that it's a terrible game by any means. I mean, after all, I sunk over 800 hours into this game during COVID. It was my primary escape away from reality for at least a year and a half, so I really need to give this game some kudos where it deserves it. I really appreciate a lot of aspects about New Horizons, especially that this entry to Animal Crossing gives the player a lot more options with design freedom and creativity, being able to add furniture around different parts of your island. Now, there are some aspects of the creative elements of this game that I feel kind of cause the game to have a bit of a midlife crisis, but we'll talk about the cons to that later. I also just want to say that I am really happy with the entire feel of the game. During COVID, it was really important to have some type of way to decompress and relax, and this game definitely did the trick. I know for me personally, I experienced a lot of anxiety during this time, so a cozy game like New Horizons really helped me feel a lot more at home. I feel though that a lot of the somewhat pros to this game also kind of have a huge downside to them, so I'll be going through those one by one. The first mechanic I want to talk about is crafting. Now, New Horizons is the first Animal Crossing entry to introduce crafting into the game, and while I do think that it's good that Nintendo went in a different direction for this new entry, I think that crafting could have been handled in a much better way. The mechanic itself is quite tedious. I mean, every time you go to craft a single item in the game, you have to wait through 2 to 3 seconds of an animation of your character crafting whatever item it is. And it doesn't matter how many times you watch it, you will be forced to watch it every single time. There's no option to really skip this. If you do hold the A button down, it speeds up the animation just a little bit, but there's no option to not show it anymore, which I find to be really annoying, especially when other games like Breath of the Wild have an option for this when you're cooking or crafting something. It gets to be a lot of time that adds up the more things you craft. Also, this game makes bulk crafting really difficult because you're not allowed to craft more than one item at a time. Even if you want to craft multiples of a single item, you have to do things one at a time. And that just makes things even more ridiculous to sit through. And I just think that this could have been handled in a much better way, so that crafting wouldn't be seen as such a chore to do. Take a game like Minecraft, for example. And I know that Minecraft is a really different kind of game from Animal Crossing, but the way that crafting works is kind of almost how I want New Horizons crafting to work, because all you have to do in Minecraft is go into the crafting menu and click the item you want, and if you have the required amount of materials, you can craft as many as you want, no waiting time or tedious amounts of animation. Also, while we're on the topic of DIY recipes, I find it really, really hard to even want to collect these recipes anymore because New Horizons doesn't have a limit on how many duplicates you can receive of the same recipe, meaning that you probably will never find all of the DIY recipes that the game has to offer naturally, and this makes it way more difficult to complete the entire catalog. And while I do understand that that's a bit more of a completionist kind of thing, it still would be nice if I'm not receiving the same cardboard box DIY for like the 10th time in a row. Cooking as a mechanic, while it is cool, there's really not a huge need for it. There's no hunger bar or any kind of hunger mechanic in Animal Crossing New Horizons, so I really don't see why they added cooking, other than the fact that you can use these culinary recipes to display food on your island, which I guess is cool and adds for a nice touch if you want to add a specific food to, let's say you're building a restaurant or a cafe. But other than that, there really isn't a need for the entire mechanic, and quite frankly, I forget that it exists all the time. And of course, we can't talk about an Animal Crossing game without discussing the villagers. And oh my, New Horizons has quite a lot of villagers. And there are some discontinued ones that I'll touch on in a little bit. But anyway, we have all these different villagers, and yet I find myself not interested in talking to like any of them. Let me put it this way. If you have 9 to 10 villagers on your island at a time, chances are you're probably going to have the same personality type on your island. Because every villager has a personality type, but there are only so many. And on your island, you can have up to 10 villagers, meaning that the personality types will repeat at least once. And the dialogue from these personality types doesn't vary at all. So if you have a villager with the same personality type, chances are you're going to be hearing the same dialogue from 2 different villagers a lot. And not even just between the personality types, but all across the board, New Horizons villagers are so boring to talk to because they'll talk about the same 3 topics every other day. There's really nothing new for them to talk about. And this is even showcased when they send letters to you. I've probably received the same letter from a villager at least 5 times. And I have so many different villagers on my island at this point. I have 10. So I've probably received like 15 to 20 copies of the same letters over and over again. And I just don't really understand how these villagers can be so boring. I mean, in New Leaf, I found myself wanting to talk to my villagers every day. Not because it's a chore or because it's something that I can do to earn Nook miles, for crying out loud. No, it's because I actually wanted to. And in this game, I find myself wanting to talk to my villagers less and less, even though villagers are quite frankly the heart of the Animal Crossing franchise. I just have no urge to talk to them when they're going to talk about the same things over and over again. They also are always either happy or just pleased to see you. They really don't have various amounts of emotions, and even if they do get sad or angry, it's only ever for like 30 seconds and then they're back to being their normal happy selves. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad that they're happy, I guess. But having a range of emotions makes an NPC way more relatable. And if an NPC is just giving you the same dialogue and the same emotions, they basically just become a blank slate. There's nothing there for me to go off of. I'm better off talking to the wall, if anything, because these villagers give me nothing new to consider or think about. And that really saddens me, especially because New Horizons is supposed to be building off of the creativity of past Animal Crossing entries. New Horizons is also the first Animal Crossing game to have a main plot, I guess you could say. None of the other Animal Crossing games seem to follow a linear story. You kind of just arrive in town and everyone's like, okay, guess you live here now. And in New Horizons, you basically found this town all on your own, being the island representative, and then told that you can upgrade your island to eventually a 5-star one. And if you get to 3 stars by using the star rating system, you will get KK Slider himself to perform on your island, and then he'll come every Saturday after that. And credits roll at this point in time once you beat the main storyline. And it kind of gives the impression that you've kind of beat the game, even though Animal Crossing is a life sim game. It doesn't really have an end, but this action of the credits rolling after you complete the most major accomplishment that the game has to offer you, it does kind of give the illusion that you've kind of beat it and there isn't really anything else to do.
Wait, I just see credits? Have I done it? Did I beat Animal Crossing?
Even though you do unlock terraforming after this concert, you only really need to use it if the player so desires to. And a lot of people do end up using terraforming to their advantage. But other than that, the game is just kinda at a standstill. And without the need to redecorate your island or move things around, there really isn't anything new that the game is throwing at you. So Animal Crossing just continuously fades into obscurity for the player. New Horizons very much follows the formula of the player makes all the decisions. I mean, we saw in entries like New Leaf that the player gets more freedom, but being the mayor didn't mean that you ruled over everyone like you do in New Horizons. You were still able to do things as a normal citizen, and the other NPCs in the game respected you as such, that you were just a person living on the land just like them. But in New Horizons, you're basically the god, and once you unlock terraforming, you're free to manipulate rivers, land, mountains, however you want. However you see fit. Oh, someone's living here? That's fine, we'll just knock it down and move it somewhere else. And the villagers don't care. The NPCs don't care. So you can literally do whatever you want. And while this is an interesting idea, let me bring the idea back that Animal Crossing is a life sim. It's a simulation game, a social simulation game. And the more creative elements that Nintendo adds into the game, the less life sim it becomes. I get that Nintendo wanted to add more creative elements into the game, but you can only add so much creative in until eventually the game stops becoming a life sim and more like a sandbox game, which Animal Crossing does not have the formula to be a sandbox game. I feel like New Horizons doesn't exactly know what it wants to be a lot of the time, because while it still has villagers as a part of the game, it doesn't necessarily focus on them anymore. And I feel like Nintendo is very much losing the heart of what Animal Crossing is originally about. Animal Crossing was created by Katsuya Iguchi after his experiences moving to a new place and not knowing anything and having to build from the ground up. He wanted to share his feelings and his experience during that time through a video game. Animal Crossing used to be a lot simpler, and this is kind of a phenomenon that happens to a lot of video games. Sometimes they get a little too overcomplicated, and the simple aspect of the game was what made it run so well and what made it so likable. And I feel like the more complicated New Horizons gets with deciding what genre of a game it should be, the more indecisive it'll cause its player base to be, which is why nobody really wants to play it anymore. I will say, I do think that the time period that New Horizons released in definitely impacted how the game was perceived and also how people played it. I mean, I probably sped up the entire process of completing the main storyline not even like 3 months after I had already purchased the game. And this process probably would have taken me way longer if life were feeling normal at that point. And I feel like COVID definitely wore the game down quite a bit, because since people were trapped inside all the time, they were completing things at a faster pace than what normally would be. I feel like while COVID-19 did help this game to find a huge player base, it just kind of wore people out, because how many days can you do something in a row until it eventually gets repetitive and boring? If they further built on the new formula that they had New Horizons sitting on, I feel like the game could have been a bit more interesting following the entire 2021 update. It would have benefited New Horizons more if there was a main shopping center, sort of like City Folk does, where you could have all of these NPCs and other recurring characters come and have their own little shopping center. It adds a lot of life into the game, and I feel like that's what Harv's Island was trying to do, but with a lot less characters, and I feel like Nintendo could have done a little bit of a better job with that, especially because the space itself isn't able to be upgraded or changed in any way at all. So I feel like if they added something like how in New Leaf, the more you play, the more upgraded your shops become, I feel like it would add an incentive to keep playing, to interact with the NPCs, and to visit the shops. After all, there are still so many NPCs and villagers and other non-player characters that we still have yet to see in New Horizons. Nintendo used to have so many more NPCs that would come visit your island in Wild World or in New Leaf. If Nintendo added more of these missing NPCs back into New Horizons, I feel like it would just increase the quality of life of this game a lot more, especially for those veteran players who feel very deeply for these characters that are currently missing from the game. I'm also quite disappointed by the lack of things and events that New Horizons had at its launch. If you picked this game up the day that it launched, you were greeted by a lot of emptiness, and especially if you were a returning Animal Crossing player, you might have expected to see, I don't know, a few NPCs or characters that you were used to seeing that you then realize are not even in the game yet, and you have to wait until an update releases them. Leaf and Red weren't even originally in the game until the Nature Day update. And it just really makes me wonder why Animal Crossing New Horizons released at such a half-baked state. To be honest, the game released and it wasn't even ready yet, and I just wish that Nintendo would have still kept updating it to this day. But since Nintendo isn't gonna do that, I guess the game's just gonna sit dormant and quite inactive until the next Animal Crossing title comes around, which could be anywhere from 2 to 5 years from now. I guess the Switch 2 is going to come out eventually, but who knows how much longer it's going to take to create the next Animal Crossing title. Let's just hope it's not as long as the hiatus between New Leaf and New Horizons. So, to kind of bring things a bit more to a close, to wrap things up, like I said before, New Horizons is by no means an absolutely terrible game, but I do think that there are some deeply rooted problems in the game's system, and how Nintendo kind of wanted to go about this game. Things could have been handled a lot better, especially regarding updates and actually releasing the game at its full capacity rather than releasing it half-baked. But of course, until the next Animal Crossing title, we won't have any new experience to go off of. Overall, I would just like to say that I hope that the next Animal Crossing entry learns from this one's mistakes, and that Nintendo takes players' thoughts into consideration while they develop another Animal Crossing game, because I am definitely not the only one who thinks that New Horizons is a bit bare bones and is missing a lot of content, and that it just feels really different from how other Animal Crossing games feel. Honestly though, this game will probably always hold a very special place in my heart due to the time that it came out in. It offered me a sense of comfort when I felt like there wasn't any, and I do have to give the game kudos to that, because I genuinely don't know what I would have spent so much of my time in quarantine doing if it wasn't for this game. So anyways, that's it on my 4-year retrospective of New Horizons. If you liked this video and you want to see some more Animal Crossing related content, feel free to comment down below what you thought. This is my first video, so I do apologize if it's not incredibly put together, but I really enjoyed the process of making it, And I hope whoever's watching this that you have a good rest of your day. Until next time, bye!